water. And in the middle of it, I look up and there's a large chest in the room. And on top of it is a glass of water. Now, I don't know if the water's been there. I don't know how it got there. There it is. Maybe it was there all along and I didn't see it. But I know I've got to put legs on my prayers. I prayed for the water. I've got to get up off my blessed assurance, walk over there, pick up the glass, and drink from it. Amen. Amen. Believe that. I remember the first time someone called me. See, because I believe in healing. I want to tell you this. The second thing that people have to find when they walk in our doors of, I believe, the Christian church is healing. And I received a telephone call. Dear Reverend Perry, a member of your church is in the hospital in Orange County. He has that new disease called GRID, gay-related immune deficiency. It was before AIDS. And it was the first time I did not know what this disease. This was new for me. In America, we still didn't know if it was airborne, how you got it. The government didn't know. But they called me and said, the member of your church is there. I drove down to that hospital and I walked in. And when I got there, you would have thought this young man was in a nuclear accident. They had signs all over the doors, you know. If you don't have to go in, don't. If you're going in, put on a mask, put on gloves, put on a robe. And I read all of this, but you know, in my heart of hearts, I've learned that I have to trust in God. And while I'm reading the signs, I'm not brave. But I looked and I thought, my member does not need to see me behind a mask. So if I'm not going to wear the mask, I'm not putting on the other things. And I opened the door and walked in. And Dean, this young man, took one look at me and started sobbing. And I rushed over to the bed, grabbed him in my arms, and for 15 minutes we cried together. And finally he started talking to me. He said, Reverend Perry, the doctors have told me I'm going to be dead. He says, in 6 months, I have 6 months to live. And I said, whoa, 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 whoa. I said to you, I love doctors, but doctors are not prophets of God. They don't know when you're going to die. Only God knows that. And so I said, listen to me. You're going to live with this, not die with it. And he said, no, Reverend Perry, you don't seem to understand. They've told me I have 6 months. I'm going to be dead in 6 months. I said, whoa, whoa. Dean, listen to me. You're going to live with this, not die with it. You're going to live with it, not die with it. He kept trying to convince me he was going to die. Finally, I said to him one last time, you are going to live with this. And I had him by the collar, so I said, say it with me. I'm not going to die with it, I'm going to live with it. He said, okay. I was scaring him to death by now, you know what I mean? He says, I am going to live with this, not die with it. I said, okay. So we sat and we talked. He had 101 fever. And we sat and we talked. And finally it was time for me to leave, and I had prayer with him. And then I said, okay, Dean, is there anything you need? Anything at all before I leave? And he said, well, there are two things, Reverend Perry. He said, first, could someone bring me a Bible? And I said, yes, I'll have one of our church members tomorrow come down and bring you a Bible. Anything else? And he said, one other thing, Reverend Perry. I said, what is that? He said, Reverend Perry, I'm so sick. I'm on this bed. You can tell that I'm running this high fever. The hospital staff will not bring my food into my room. They're leaving it out in the hallway. And I cannot get up out of bed. I am so weak. And get out and eat the food they're leaving out there. And I said, don't you worry, Dean. I'll take care of that for you. I said, anything else? He said, no, sir, that's it. I said, well, I'm leaving town. I'll be back in 2 weeks. But every day, a member of the church will be here with you every day. I will make sure of that. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened every day that he was there. You know, someone came down and talked to him. Now, I have to tell you the end of the story, but before I come back to my 2-week visit, the end of the story is this. Dean didn't live for 6 months, he lived for 4 years. Dean became the first person with AIDS in my country to testify in front of Congress. Dean, who had such a poor self-image of himself, he said, you know, I didn't even start living until I was diagnosed HIV positive. I didn't even start living. And he said, Reverend Perry, I've lived with it. You know, I want you to know that I'm living with it. Well, 2 weeks, let me go back to my story now. 2 weeks later, I come back to visit him. Let me back up just a minute. After I visited him, I'm sorry I've lost part of my story. I want to go back for just a minute. When I left his room that day, I went up to the administrator of the hospital. And I walked in, and all at once, the woman who was behind the counter, the receptionist at that time, looked up, saw me in my collar, and I was dressed like Reverend Pat. And immediately she looked up and said, "Oh, hello, Father, how are you?" I did not correct her. Whatever it takes to get in the room, I'm going to do that. And I said, "I want to talk to the hospital administrator." And immediately she said, "Yes." She said, "Father, what's your last name?" I said, "Perry, P-E-R-R-Y. And I heard her call, you know, the administrator, and she said, "Yes, Father Perry's here to see you." And immediately, "Oh yes, send Father in," like we were long lost brothers, you know what I mean? And I marched into his room and I said to him, "I have a member of my church down on the first floor of this hospital. You know, in the room with all the signs that make him look like he's in a nuclear accident. He has that new disease called grid. He told me something." I said, "He told me your staff is not feeding him. They are leaving his food outside the room. Now, you don't know who I am, but if you want publicity, I'm the one to give it to you." And immediately I just turned around and left. And immediately, like I said, when I came back 2 weeks later, all at once his fever has broke. And he's looking so good. And Dean was so excited. He said, "Reverend Perry, they're going to let me go home in 2 days." And he said, I said, "That's wonderful." He said, "Can someone come and pick me up?" I said, "Yes, I'll get someone from the church. Don't you worry. We'll pick you up. We're not going to leave you here by yourself or make you ride the bus back to Los Angeles. We will take care of you." So we had prayer. We talked. Finally, it was time for me to leave. And I said, "Dean, is there anything I can help you with? Anything at all before I leave?" He said, "Well, I have one problem." I said, "What is that?" He says, "They won't quit feeding me. Every 2 hours they're down here feeding me food." And I said, "That's a good problem, not a bad one." And you know, when Dean lay dying, he had moved to San Francisco, California, and was a part of our church there. 6 of our members were around him as he lay dying. And they said, "Reverend Perry, the last thing he said was he wanted you to know, tell Reverend Perry, I didn't die with it, I lived with it." And so, I know without a shadow of a doubt, there is still healing. See, in Metropolitan Community Church, we believe in healing. I believe in healing for people with AIDS. Now, there's a difference between a cure and healing. I know there is no cure yet, and now in my country it's treated like a chronic illness. But I learned a long time ago, too, that God is the great healer. We had buttons made that said, "God is greater than AIDS." Universal Fellowship of Metropolitan Community Churches, our entire denominational name. I, with my sister Nancy Wilson, I received a letter one day, and it was from the National Conference of Catholic Bishops in America. And it said, "Dear Reverend Perry, we want to invite you and one other clergy from your church to be a part of His Holiness's visit." It was the first visit of John Paul II to America. And we're going to be meeting with Protestant leaders, and we're going to hold a service, and we'd like for you to be there. And you can bring someone with you. Well, I picked Reverend Elder Nancy Wilson, our bishop now, the presiding bishop of our denomination, because I wanted our Catholic brothers and sisters to see a woman in collar too, to know that God calls everyone, not just men, but everyone. And I want to tell you, when we arrived there, it was wonderful to be a part of that celebration. Now, when I first got the letter, I thought, oh my goodness, as I read, I turned it over. I said, this cannot be real. The National Conference of Catholic Bishops cannot be inviting me to be a part of His Holiness visit. And I said, I can just see it now. One of the secretaries, male secretaries to some bishop, I said, some queen sat there and said, "Oh, let's add Reverend Perry to the list." You know what I mean? But it wasn't like that at all. They treated us with such dignity because we're not Catholic. And they invited all the Protestants in. And that made a difference for them. So they didn't care if you're a heterosexual Christian, if you were a Protestant, or a gay or lesbian one. It didn't make any difference. You were a Protestant. Healing. Healing can make all the difference in the world in our lives and our hearts. I want to tell you this. My last point. And I'll tell you this, my three-pointers sermon, the last thing is, I used to have someone who'd come into MCC from the Episcopal Church. I think you